High school graduation exam. During the high school graduation exam, students openly pulled out cheat sheets from their pockets right in front of the teacher. But instead of stopping them, the teacher actually wrote the answers directly on the blackboard. To be precise, this was a cheating exam. It turned out that the school authorities, in order to impress visiting government officials, had resorted to cheating as a way to boost students' university admission rates. Unexpectedly, this scene was caught red-handed by a newly appointed police chief. He immediately confiscated the students' cheat sheets and put a stop to the fraudulent exam. The principal, witnessing this, showed no signs of panic. Instead, he invited the chief to his office for a chat. Then, with practiced ease, he pulled out a gift box from his drawer and handed it to the chief. When opened, it revealed a thick stack of cash. It was clear that this wasn't the principal's first time doing this. But this police chief was different from previous officials. He immediately ordered his officers to take photos and document the entire bribery process, then took the principal back to the station for investigation. This is a scene from the newly released Indian movie The 12th Failure, which has already received an astonishing score of 9.2 from nearly 1 million viewers. If you, like me, often feel lost or confused, take a moment to sit down and watch this video. I believe it will bring you great inspiration. Background of the story. The story is set in a remote small town in India, where the biggest dream for kids is to become a government official and have a stable job. But for a country like India, the world's second most populous, government exams are notoriously difficult. According to incomplete statistics from 2023, over 20 million Indian youths signed up for the exams, yet only 836 were ultimately accepted. Despite this, many still dedicate half their lives to preparing for these exams, because once accepted, you instantly rise to the top tier of society. The boy in front of us, George, is one of those 20 million students. His family is so poor they can barely afford food, but his grandmother firmly believes that only knowledge can change destiny. To help George take next month's exam, she gives him all the money she's saved over her lifetime. Carrying his grandmother's hopes, George sets off on his journey to take the civil service exam. But fate plays a cruel joke on him. Just as he boards the bus, he gets motion sickness and passes out. When he wakes up, he discovers his satchel is gone. The driver tells him it was likely stolen by a passenger who got off midway. Fresh out into society, George gets a harsh lesson from reality. He stands there in despair, completely stunned. Didn't know what to do, because inside it was all the living expenses his grandmother had given him. Without money, he had no way to survive in the big city. There was less than a week left until the national exam. George decided to spend a few nights by the roadside first. He planned to go back after the exam. Watching the diners inside the restaurant, he endured his hunger just by imagining eating. That night passed like that. By the next day, George didn't even have the strength to stand. He was truly starving. Staggering, he walked into a restaurant. He explained to the owner that his wallet had been stolen and asked if he could spare him some food. The owner, seeing how pitiful George looked, told the waiter to serve him a lunch. In no time, George had cleaned the plate completely. At that moment, a boy sitting opposite took a keen interest in George. From that moment, the gears of fate began to turn. After lunch, George went up to the owner and introduced himself as a recent graduate. He wanted to work at the restaurant to repay the meal. All my belongings were stolen. I have nothing left. Tell me a way to repay, or I won't leave. Don't be so stubborn, said the owner. It's just one meal, nothing major. The two argued over the issue. Then the boy from earlier stopped George, saying he was willing to pay for the meal. While chatting, George found out that the boy, Machi, was also preparing for the national exam. They were heading in the same direction, so Machi took George to where he was staying. It was a rundown tutoring hostel. Standing in the center was a senior student who had failed the exam more than 10 times. He must have had many experiences with failure. So he opened this hostel for free, letting national exam candidates learn from past mistakes. This, he said, is your first UPSC class, starting with the prelims. The national exam had 3 rounds. Like a chessboard, players are eliminated step by step. In the first round alone, tens of millions would be cut off. In the second, 99% would be eliminated again. And finally, only 1,000 out of 100,000 interviewees would be selected. For first-time test takers like them, it was an enormous challenge. George and Machi faced their first round, and both were eliminated. The senior told them not to lose heart. He had failed too. But he always believed that one day he'd make it to the top list. From then on, The hostel would offer them free 24-hour tutoring. George and Machi were once again filled with hope. Hard work pays off in the end. After a full year of effort,
George participated in the preliminary test again, and this time he finally passed. His senior was genuinely happy for him. That same afternoon, a senior who had passed the interview came to the hostel to share his experience with them. He advised those who had passed the first round not to waste time on part-time jobs, but to focus entirely on preparing for the second round of exams. If financially possible, they should even consider joining a training course. At that moment, George walked over carrying tea. The senior mistook him for a waiter. The senior explained the misunderstanding, and after learning that George had also passed the first round, he told George to come to him if he ever had any study-related problems. That one sentence would later play a crucial role in George's exams. Over the past year, George had worked hard and saved up some money. He signed up at a training institution, but his 680 yuan wasn't even enough for the deposit. Still, the woman there saw money coming in and didn't want to miss out. She said George could work while paying off the tuition and immediately asked him to help with chores. While sorting photos, George accidentally discovered that the senior's picture was in the training materials, but the senior had clearly gotten through by self-studying. Could the training center be using his fame to deceive people? Being upright by nature, George immediately confronted the woman outside and exposed her lie. She then pulled him aside privately, claiming the senior had actually given his consent. It turned out the institution had spent hundreds of thousands to collaborate with successful candidates. No one refuses easy money, she said. She told George that if he could pass too, they'd pay him hundreds of thousands for the rights to use his image. But even so, George still chose to expose her lie in front of the customers. He wanted to be a person of integrity, just like the police chief he once admired. With the help of a girl, George managed to get his 680 yuan registration fee back. The two unexpectedly became close friends. From then on, they studied and ate together, always by each other's side, but never revealed the feelings they kept inside. One day, during a tutoring session, the teacher suddenly asked a question. Lena thought George was a top university graduate, so she raised her hand to answer for him. But the teacher revealed on the spot that George had only graduated from high school. The two had a falling out over this. George explained that he had never claimed to be a university student. Lena had simply misunderstood. They moved on to the second round of exams. Unfortunately, George misinterpreted the essay prompt, which meant he wouldn't be able to pass. Luckily, it was only his second year of trying. There were still more chances ahead.
But from that day on, Lena lost contact with George. In order to salvage the feelings she never got the chance to express, she journeyed over mountains and rivers to Lena's hometown. The door was opened by the family's housekeeper, who explained that Lena had gone with her parents to attend a friend's wedding. George asked the housekeeper to make a phone call. On the call, she finally confessed the "I love you" that she had long buried in her heart. Lena didn't respond. She made an excuse and had the housekeeper take the call instead. Then she asked the housekeeper to pass on a message. She hoped George would focus on his studies and not waste time on love. Her older sister told her, "Come home." Disappointed, George left Lena's home. When she returned to her small town, 2 years had already passed. Her younger sister ran up and hugged her emotionally. George casually mentioned their grandmother, and suddenly, the smile on her sister's face disappeared. It turned out their grandmother had passed away from illness not long after George left. Their mother didn't tell her because she didn't want it to affect George's preparation for the National Civil Service exam. Their mother said that before she died, Grandma kept repeating one thing. She believed her grandson would pass the exam and return home in glory. My son wanted to talk to him that day. From then on, George vowed to fulfill Grandma's wish and become a civil servant. He worked tirelessly at a flour factory during the day and studied in his spare time at night. Unknowingly, 2 more years passed. Not only had George made no progress, he was getting worse. One night, his former senior suddenly showed up and pointed out the root of the problem. George worked 15 hours a day and studied 5 hours at night, leaving only 4 hours to sleep. How could he possibly compete with candidates who studied full-time? The senior offered George a room at his lodge to focus solely on studying. He said he'd cover all food and living expenses and even send money home if needed. From now on, George had only one mission: study. How do you know this is just your battle? This is a battle for all of us. If we win one battle, we win for millions of people. But just having time to study wasn't enough. George found another mentor, who had since become the town's well-known police chief. With his help, George finally mastered the key to the final round of exams. The National Civil Service exam came around again. George successfully passed the first 2 rounds. Only the final interview remained. One night while he was studying, Lena came to see him. She explained that she did what she did before because she didn't want to disturb his studies. The two reconciled and got back together. On the day of the interview, Lena handed George a letter asking him not to open it until after the interview. When George entered the interview hall, the security staff found out he only had a high school diploma. Knowing Knowing the examiners were strict about education, they came up with a plan. George should say that he failed his college entrance exam because his grandmother died and he couldn't perform well. That way, the interviewers might not make things difficult for him. Sitting in the office, the examiner read aloud, "Mr. Sharma has graduated in history and Hindi literature in the 2nd division." Just as expected, they questioned George about his lack of a college degree. George paused. He knew he could lie and maybe get through it, but that wasn't who he wanted to be, so he told the truth. He had been caught cheating by the police chief and lost his qualification for the college entrance exam. "There was a new professor in our village, Mr. Ducian. He got tricked. The whole school failed. You can go ask him." As expected, the examiner immediately told George to get out. Disappointed, he turned to leave. But a female examiner stopped him and told him to wait outside for a re-interview. Outside, George took out the letter from his pocket and opened it. "Wenxiang, whether you become a commissioner or just a clerk, I want to be with you for the rest of my life. Whether you're a civil servant or a flower factory worker, I want to grow old with you." In that moment, George finally let go of the burden in his heart. He took off his shoes and sat on a bench. Success or failure no longer mattered to him. Back in the interview room, the female examiner asked, "You could have lied and gotten through. Why didn't you?" In front of the interview panel, George told them a story about the police chief. "Everyone else's first place and my 3rd place, but I was the happiest because that day I understood. An honest 3rd place is better than a misunderstood first. Only by treating others with sincerity can we build lasting trust." His words impressed all the interviewers. As George was leaving, the female examiner remarked, "This kind of integrity is exactly what
lacks. If we don't recruit people like him, what's the point of sitting in these seats?" 2 months later, Lena took George to check the final admission list. George, thinking he surely didn't pass, hesitated at the door, so Lena went in alone to search for his name. Soon, she looked out from the crowd with tears in her eyes and nodded at George. That meant all his hard work had not been in vain. The examiners had recognized him. Everyone gathered around, thrilled for George's success. Half a year later, George returned to his hometown in glory. The once upright police chief mistook his visit for an inspection from a government official, but was stunned to find it was the student he had once mentored. The two embraced with emotion. The film ends here. This movie is based on a true story, and the real events were even more inspiring than the film itself.